out there, we're on the air, it's hockey night tonight. Tension grows, the whistle blows, and the puck goes down the ice. The goalie jumps and the players bump and the fans all go insane. Someone roars, Bobby scores at the good old hockey game.
Welcome to the show. That's right, it's the Holy Land Hockey Hour here with the sports rabbi, Yossi G, and my main man, Dan the Man Friedman. What's going on, Dan? Joining me from the phones, because we couldn't make it into the studio, both of us today at the same time, to be, of course, in the same place. Always a traveling man you are, Dan.
I guess so.
Yeah, so let's go into what we have already on the plate. We got the NHL Stanley Cup Finals set to begin tonight at the United Center in Chicago. This is what it's all about. Granted, this season it's a culmination of a very short season, but a culmination of the entire season and postseason, and have we had a postseason up to date, all pointing towards this series. Chicago and Boston, both original six teams, never meeting each other for all the glory. This is their first meeting in the Cup Final, and this is the first original six matchup since Montreal and Atlanta in 1979. Boston, really, they're a team that's built for the playoffs. Chicago is kind of expected to be here after opening up this season with a 24-point game streak. So, what do you gather from both of these two teams? I mean, you're looking at both of these teams, and they look pretty well stacked when you put one up to the other.
Yeah, they do look very well stacked. I think you have to look at the way that both teams played in the playoffs and the mental toughness both teams showed. Boston was down 3-1 in that Game 7 against Toronto, and they came back won. Chicago was down 3-1 in their series against Detroit. So, and they came back and won. So both teams have had to, face their own share of adversity. But it's hard to pick. It's hard to pick a winner here. I mean, they are so well stacked, and it's going to be a very good matchup. I think it's going to be pretty even as well.
Well, first off the bat, like you mentioned, the first impressions that hit me from both teams, I'm looking at both Boston as well as Chicago, is the adversity that they faced. And with Chicago, they were down 3-1 to Detroit, and they won that series. They, of course, have the additional pressure as being the President's Trophy winner, the number one seed overall. Boston, on the other hand, they were expected to make a deep run for the playoffs, and they were seriously giving a run for the number one chokers in the NHL this season when they lost a 3-1 games lead to Toronto, and they were down 4-1 with about 10 minutes to go in the third period. But they took that chokers to character in a flash, and of course, since that overtime game winner series clincher goal by Patrice Bergeron, that was his first goal of the playoffs, and that seems to have propelled him to be playing on a sphere that we expected him to bring, on a level of gamesmanship that we had always expected for him to bring to the table, expected him to play with, and hoped that he would be able to play with. Until that point, until that overtime goal against Toronto, he was virtually invisible. It almost seemed as if that goal woke him up.
Yeah, it did. Patrice Bergeron is the kind of player that you do expect to play hard. And he did, and I would argue though even though that was his first goal, he'd been doing a lot of the little things, which is what he does best. Really, he wins face-offs, he plays well defensively. He takes pucks away. He's very good positionally, and he always back checks. So Patrice Bergeron is someone you expect to show up, like you said. But I think it's also David Krejci. You have to look at David Krejci. Has really been the catalyst for that offense in Boston. He's been the best player in the playoffs, in my opinion, for any team. At least as far as the skaters are concerned. And he's really been great. He's been scoring. He's been passing. He's been doing a lot of things for Boston. So I think, he, as good as Bergeron's been, I think you have to look at Krejci and look at him as the real catalyst, in my opinion.
I definitely will give you some props to that yes, David Krejci has certainly been playing above his level that we've seen. He's taken his game to that next level in these playoffs, certainly. But before we get into this matchup, before we break it down, the teams, both Chicago and Boston, let's talk about first how they got here. The last round was a round where everybody figured, it's the Final Four between Chicago, Los Angeles, Pittsburgh, and Boston. These four teams each having won the last four Stanley Cups between all four of them. And the series really weren't all that close. Chicago won its series in 5 games. Boston swept its series, and these are against teams that are of very high caliber opponents. These aren't just, the Florida Panthers or the Columbus Blue Jackets. These are teams that come high powered, a lot of places where points can be scored from, a lot of characters on the team, all knowing how to play and which method to best put their team forward. And it seemed like Boston got the better of Pittsburgh from game 1, and Chicago really took it to Los Angeles after the Kings tied up the series after the second game.
Yeah, LA, I didn't really expect it from, although the injury to Mike Richards had to have played a role. It definitely affected them. They just weren't the same after that. They looked a little rattled. Yeah, I was surprised by them. But Pittsburgh it really didn't surprise me, I'll be honest with you. And I was surprised that they were still in the playoffs, to get into the third round. I really thought Ottawa could have beat them. I still think Ottawa, had they played their game, could have beat them. They dropped the ball. But I knew that it was really only a matter of time. This team is not going to the Stanley Cup Finals. They just completely lacked defense. Their goaltending was struggling a little bit. A lot of those defensemen are very slow, and if you have a good transition, you're going to drive them crazy if you catch them off guard. And I don't know how much you could put on Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin, but yeah, they didn't have any points. Chris Peng didn't have any points. Gimler didn't have any points. That's definitely a factor too. And the Penguins really insisted on. It almost seemed as if they were more focused on knocking the Bruins body check for body check instead of trading chances and trying to produce more offense. And they also went, and when they did try to produce offense, they insisted on using, purely their skill, which is not the way you win in the playoffs. And especially not against a team like the Bruins. You got to go to the dirty areas. You got to work harder for that in goal. You're not going to have all those passing lanes open like you do in the regular season. And like I said, certainly not against Boston. But Pittsburgh seemed insistent on doing that. And I remember, I think it was game 2, and the Bruins were up 3-1 in the first period, I think. And I think it was Pierre Maguire or Brian Engvall. I forgot. Interviewed Dan Bylsma, the coach, during right after a commercial break, and said, what do you guys need to do to fix this? And he said, we just need to keep doing what we're doing. And surely enough, they did keep doing what they were doing, and the lead was doubled, and they lost 6-1. So, I really felt like there were just a lot of key elements missing to Pittsburgh's game. I thought they were poorly coached. I thought they just completely lacked discipline or focus, and that's where I blame Dan Bylsma. And this is the second year this has happened in the playoffs now. Last year it happened against the Flyers in the first round. They just completely lost their minds. Sidney Crosby was throwing people's gloves all over the ice, and they were fighting. And you saw Sidney Crosby chirping against Zdeno Chara and almost like pretending to start a fight with him, like as if he had a chance of a fight with Zdeno Chara anyway. They just looked like they lost their focus, and I just knew this team wasn't really going anywhere. They just did not look like a contender to me. Well,
for Boston's sake, the only way that they were going to have any chance of beating the Pittsburgh, for Pittsburgh's sake, the only chance they would have at beating Boston was for somebody to get under Chara's skin. The guy's a behemoth, and he's the largest NHL player out there. But you're not going to
get under his skin. It's just not going to happen.
Well, they at least had to try, and surely they did, and likely realized after game 1 it wasn't going to happen. Chara, averaging 29 minutes a game this postseason, has often been playing double shifts in order to neutralize the opponent's both first and second lines. And we'll talk about what that will have to deal with him in the Cup Finals. But staying on with the third round, what you mentioned with Joe McGinley, he stuffed it to Boston. Everybody thought he was going to go to Boston, and then he chose Pittsburgh as at the 11th hour to be traded to the Penguins. Do you think that had anything to do with how Boston played? Maybe they felt a little bit slighted by Iginla and were kind of trying to show him, hey, this is where the place is at, not in Pittsburgh.
I mean, I'm sure that you can say that maybe it was, locker, maybe it was locker room, bulletin board material, if you want to say it like that. But I don't think the Bruins would have approached the series any differently had Jerome McGinley been on their side. I mean, this is the way the Bruins have always played. They look no different than what you expected from them. They played that, the grinding game. They had guys in front of the net always. They were very good defensively. I didn't see anything different from them, or anything I wouldn't have expected. They looked very strong, and so it didn't surprise me.
Well, yeah, certainly the way the Boston Bruins have been playing in the postseason since that series against Toronto really has propelled them to the next level, taking it to New York, to the Rangers, ousting them, and of course upping their game against Pittsburgh, a team, like you've said throughout the entire postseason, that really did not deserve to be in the place that they were in the Eastern Conference Finals, a team that really, at the end of the day, they did capitalize on a lot of their scoring opportunities in the first couple of series, but against Boston, it's a whole nother beast when you're playing a young team in Ottawa versus a very experienced team in the Boston Bruins, and we see what the results were. Quite simply, you had a lot of players on the Pittsburgh Penguins. You had a couple players, Brendan Morrow, Jerome McGinley, who had never really
plenty
been
experience on the Boston side. I mean, on the Pittsburgh side. I mean, I don't think that experience is a factor. These guys, first of all, Sidney Crosby, these guys have a Stanley Cup ring. They've been to 2 Stanley Cup Finals. Playoff experience. Jerome McGinley has playoff experience. He's been to a Stanley Cup Finals. You have guys like Brooks Orpik, and these guys have been in the playoffs. They've won games. They know what it takes to win. I don't think it was a matter of a lack of experience, or the fact that they were up against a team with so much experience. They had just as much experience as the team they were up against.
Well, I think
if not more.
Right, and I think then what ends up being is the way that it was put out on the ice. Like you said, that the Pittsburgh Penguins were completely thrown off their game. They were not playing the game that they should have been playing. They were playing, trying to get into the heads of the Bruins, but you're not getting into their heads very easily.
And as a head coach, you've got to settle your guys down at some point and say, hey, we have to stop doing this. We have to cut it out. And Dan Bylsma, for the second year in a row, it just looks like he either hasn't done that or he tries to and he's just lost the room. And so, the fact that they signed him to a 2-year extension this morning, it really doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to that later on in the show. But just quickly before we go to commercial break, Chicago and Los Angeles, it looked like this was going to be a series, and then Chicago just turned it on. What happened?
Well, I mean, Chicago, for one thing, Chicago played their game. And again, I think the injury to Mike Richards, I really think it rattled LA. I don't think it got to the point where they couldn't have won the series without him. But I think, at least from a mental standpoint, I think it definitely rattled them a little bit, and it allowed Chicago to take advantage of that at times. LA, I thought, was just they were a little too careless. They're taking too many penalties at times. I thought, I wouldn't blame Jonathan Quick. I thought Jonathan Quick was fine. Even though he was pulled from one game, which you really will not see happen very often.
Well, yeah, you have an off game every now and again. That's kind of bound to happen.
I don't even think that game was his fault. I think Sutter just wanted to get him out of there because he didn't need his starting goalie getting shelled. If the defense is hanging him out to dry, that's just not the night for him to be in there.
Right, for sure. And I think the defense kind of was given a check to the gut once that happened, and you saw Bernier did not even allow one more goal, but it was too late at that point. And of course, we saw what happened with the rest of the series. Chicago took it to Los Angeles and ousted the defending Stanley Cup champions in 5 games. When we get back from this commercial break, Dan and I will break down the Chicago-Boston series. You're listening to the Holy Land Hockey Hour here on Israel Sports Radio.
Honey, again you're sitting here sulking?
I hate my job, and I don't know what to do to change it.
Get off the couch and go check out the Connecticut School of Broadcasting.
The Connecticut School of Broadcasting? What's that? The Connecticut School of Broadcasting offers a career and lifestyle change through a broadcasting experience you won't ever forget. Log on to GoCSB.com to find out how a career in broadcasting is for you and not just the people you see on TV or hear on the radio. CSB focuses on many aspects of real-world broadcasting, and their knowledgeable instructors teach you through a hands-on approach so you're in the studio in no time. To find out how CSB can help you work in an industry you love, call 1-800-TV-RADIO or check us out online at GoCSB.com. Why work 50 weeks a year for a 2-week vacation when you can enjoy your job every day? Don't just sit there. Call 1-800-TV-RADIO or log on to GoCSB.com. Thanks, CSB. All right, welcome back, everybody. Back to the Holy Line Hockey Hour here with the sports rabbi Yossi G and Dan the Man Friedman here joining me via telephone as, of course, as it usually is with a man who is as busy as Dan. It's kind of hard to get him pinned down to one place, but get him pinned down to a studio at a certain time. So it's good to have you nonetheless on your telephone, even though I'm sure you're doing a half dozen other things during the commercial breaks. But like we mentioned before the commercial break, we're going to talk about this series. We're in the here and now. We're not in yesterday. We're not in last week. We're not in the 2 or 3 series ago. Chicago, Boston. Let's start with the forwards for both of these teams. Now, on my end, I'm looking at Chicago. I mean, this team, as deep as Boston is, Chicago is even deeper because think about it like this. They have players who regularly play on their second line, like, for example, Dave Bolland. He's logging fourth-line minutes. That's how deep they are. Every forward, except for Brandon Bollig, who's only played in 3 games this postseason, has at least 1 point. And you got, like, 4 players in double digits in terms of points. 5 players have at least 4 goals. Patrick Kane is on a playoff tier this last series, the last couple of games, and Patrick Sharp and Brian Bickle have 8 goals each. I mean, it's kind of, if you are Joe Quenneville, this is what you want. This is the spot that you want your team to be in, playing well, heading into the championship round, heading into the Cup Finals. This is where you want them to be. Is there any other way, any other position that Chicago should rather be in outside of where they currently find themselves?
No, I think they're exactly where they should be, and I think that Patrick Kane, who was criticized pretty much the entire playoffs, he's been terrible. I think hopefully for them he's heating up at the right time, and that certainly should bode well for them in the Stanley Cup Finals. I think the key to Chicago really is I think they do have a lot of depth. David Bolland has actually struggled. That's why he's brought down, but they have the depth to bring guys up in his stead. And that's obviously very convenient. Boston's also 4 lines deep.
Yes, for sure. Boston's 4 lines deep.
Chicago, they're in a great place right now.
But also you're looking at Boston. I mean, Krejci has 21 points in 16 games. That's leading everybody right now in the postseason. And of course, it doesn't hurt that he's in the Cup Finals too. Milan Lucic and Horton on that Krejci line have combined for 30 points and are plus 34. When you look at the second line, Brad Marchand, Jaromir Jagr, and Patrice Bergeron, I mean, this is really where they're going. It's a top-flight second line. Now you're talking the third line, also pretty solid. Fourth line has its ups, but now I think it's going to have its downs. Gregory Campbell being injured is probably going to loom large for their fourth line, not being able to perform to the way that they had up until Campbell went down, or through the series with Pittsburgh. And if I had to give anybody an edge, I would give my edge to Chicago simply based that they have a full 4 lines, and Boston with Campbell down is 3 and change.
I don't know. I mean, I think both teams have 4 full lines. It's just a question of who's on those lines. I think that Chicago for me is they have difference makers in their lineup. They have a Jonathan Toews or a Patrick Kane, and those are 2 kind of players. I really don't think Boston has anybody as good as David Krejci's been. When the chips are down, I'm gonna take my chances with Jonathan Toews over David Krejci 9 out of 10 times. So I think they have those players: Marian Hossa, Patrick Sharp. These are the kinds of players that Boston doesn't have. Boston has a lot of guys who will chip in, but no flat out superstars on offense. And I think they have enough depth that they'll hang in the series, obviously, and they'll be able to score goals and produce offense. But in terms of coming through in the clutch, other than Patrice Bergeron, I'm having trouble finding someone. Jonathan Toews, Patrick Kane, these guys are guys who will step up in the clutch. Can produce big goals, who can change the outlook of games. And I think that's something that Chicago has, Boston doesn't.
I'm looking at both of these. I mean, I'm listening to what you're saying, and I don't necessarily disagree with that. But when you look at Boston, I guess you can call it their terror is that there is no one person. on any given night. It can be anybody at any given day or any given game that will be the guy for Boston at that point. Now, when you look at both teams, Chicago has the offensive firepower, but Boston is a very defense-minded team. And you look at their defense, arguably the best defense in the National Hockey League playoffs. So when you put those two side by side, and then Boston's decent, I guess you can say, decent to good offense and Chicago's decent to good defense, they're both teams all around are, of course, evenly matched. And there's no one's going to say that there is a clear-cut favorite to win this Stanley Cup. Every which way you're going to break down both of these teams, there is going to be an answer for whatever it is you're going to say. Now, when you look at the defense, Chicago has Brent Seabrook and Duncan Keith leading the way. And any team that would love to have these two guys leading the way. They both feature a defense that's only allowed 33 goals in the playoffs. They themselves have 6 goals, 21 assists on the defense as a whole. And then you have Nicholas Hjalmarsson and
I was just about to mention Hjalmarsson. He might be the most underrated defenseman in the playoffs. Probably one of the most underrated defensemen in the league.
And I have to mention this one guy who's on defense just because every time his name is said by either Doc Emmerich or anybody else who's announcing. Johnny Oduya. He's my man. He's my guy. Formerly of the Devils, but he's still my guy. I don't care. I just love that name. That's just how it is. And for that reason alone, I would think to give the edge on defense to Chicago, just because they have Johnny Oduya. But Johnny Oduya aside, Boston is definitely, if this is the only spot I think that somebody has a clear-cut edge without batting an eyelash, it's Boston. Chara, like I said, he's averaging about between 29 and 30 minutes a game, has no problem doubling up shifts to make sure that the opponent's top two lines are neutralized. Dennis Seidenberg might also be one of the largely overlooked players on Boston simply because he has that huge shadow over him, that being Chara, his line mate on defense. You look through the rest of Boston's defense, Andrew Ferentz returning for last round, definitely buoys that line with Johnny Boychuk, that pair, that defensive pair with Boychuk, and allowing them to also give Chara a little bit of rest. So this way, their coach doesn't have to always keep having Chara playing a double shift. Torrey Krug coming up from the AHL, I think that was one of the wisest moves I've seen of late. This kid is playing flat out amazing hockey, and really, yes, he's still learning the game because think about
it. Very raw.
The first goal he had of his NHL career came against the Rangers, very raw, like you said, and I think that his presence, the major positive that it's done for Boston, it's reawakened its power play, which we'll get to shortly. Now, Boston's power play was borderline abysmal, depending on, with the Rangers at that point when they met in the second round. And then Torrey Krug just went crunk, and that was the end of that. I mean, that was the end of that argument. Boston's now at, around 15% or so converting their power play. And Adam McQuaid, look, he was, if I recall correctly, he was a Norris candidate finalist, and he's
McQuaid. No.
Okay, so I got my notes all messed up
Norris
here.
Trophy now.
So, but nonetheless, McQuaid scored the series clincher against Pittsburgh, and
yes, he did.
What the defense has done: 15 goals, 20 assists, 35 points. You know that Boston's defense is going to come to play. It's going to show up, and they're going to play two-way, both on the offensive side as well, of course, on the defensive side. If you're Chicago, how do you combat that? You've seen other teams try to forecheck Chara, try to get under his skin, try to beat him up in the corners, digging out pucks. But nothing seems to work. It seems as much as you throw at him, he takes that energy and throws it right back at you. What do you do if you're Chicago?
I mean, I don't know. I think Chicago really just needs to play their game, honestly, and not make the mistake that Pittsburgh made. And I think Pittsburgh tried to, they tried to react to that and to counter it to, react simply to that by trying to neutralize him instead of just sticking to what they do best. And I think that again, like Chicago, I think they would be best served to just go out there and play their game, really play their style. Don't get lured in, and I think that's the way really that they're going to be Boston. They're going to neutralize them. They're going to neutralize this.
Well, I still think, like we said, okay, so the forwards, you give it to the offense, you give to Chicago, the defense, I'm giving it to Boston. Now let's move on to the goalies. Both goalies before the postseason, or maybe a month before the postseason began, they were kind of, just there for the ride. I mean, they were both playing very well, but
they're both very good.
But the team as a whole was doing more than just solely relying on the goalie to perform night in, night out. All the goalies had to do.
Well, that's not a good. That's not a good situation either. If you're just relying on your goalie.
No, of course not. And both teams did not have to rely on their goalie. And the goalies came. They play their game. They do their thing. And the team, their respective teams, of course, go on and play lights out. Now, both goalies have started in the playoffs after being more than just standing around, so to speak. Tuukka Rask has stopped all but 2 shots against Pittsburgh, has a 1.75 goals against and a 9.43 save percentage in the postseason. Corey Crawford, a hair better on the goals against at 1.74, but overwhelmingly Rask better as Crawford only punches in at a 9.35 save percentage. I would have to give Rask the edge here, simply because of the way that he played against Pittsburgh. What do you think?
To be fair, though, Corey Crawford also survived those overtime games, against Detroit. So he's been tested. I mean, I wouldn't say give Tuukka Rask the edge just because he played in that huge game against Pittsburgh. I mean, I do happen to think he's the better goalie though all around. I wouldn't say that. I would say that even though he's better than Crawford, I wouldn't necessarily give it an edge because at the end of the day, both goalies are going to show up. It's not like one team has a good goalie, the other team doesn't. So I wouldn't call it so much an edge. I think ultimately against both these goalies, you're going to have to work hard for your goals. You're gonna have to fight hard for them, and you're gonna be up against a very tough defense. So I wouldn't say that either team really has an edge in the goaltending department. Both certainly have good goaltenders, and maybe Tuukka Rask is a bit better, but not so much that I would call it an edge.
All right. Well, also I think a lot of people on the East Coast, certainly, who have not seen Chicago playing that much. Certainly this past season we didn't see any of them playing in the East Coast because they were just in a whole different conference. I think a lot of people will get an eye-opening or have their eyes open for them once they see how well Corey Crawford can actually play. Yeah, you heard Tuukka Rask. Yeah, it kind of sounds a very foreign name, something like that always stands out. A guy who's got 2 U's and 2 K's in his name usually stands out because, hey, that's a funky name. So, hey, let's go check out, see what he's doing for his team, or lack thereof. A guy like Corey Crawford is almost a guy like Mike Smith. It's just another name, and it kind of goes by the wayside because he doesn't stand out that much as, say, a Taves or a Kane or a Sharp or something like that. Someone like that. It will be a pleasant surprise for a lot of people once they see how well Corey Crawford actually is.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think people have definitely seen him now. He's been here. The playoffs, like they've been on, NBC and NBC Sports Network. So people have gotten a glimpse of him. I mean, they haven't been watching him all year. But yeah, I do think people will finally, and especially if he elevates his game in the Stanley Cup Finals, I think people will finally realize that this guy is for real. And I hope that he lives up to the test.
And certainly it should be fun to watch both of these goalies. And when we get back from this quick commercial break, we'll break down the coaches, we'll break down the intangible X factors, and of course, who is going to win the Cup Finals. You're listening to the Holy Land Hockey Hour here on IsraelSportsRadio.com.
All Noise Radio. Powered by the Connecticut School of Broadcasting. All Noise Radio is an internet radio station that's fully produced by graduates of the Connecticut School of Broadcasting. From modern rock to old school hip hop, country to classical, news, talk, sports, and more. It's the noise you can't ignore. Log on to allnoiseradio.com. Fire up the station. Find out more about your favorite jocks. Get the latest CSB news and more. Plus, you can take All Noise Radio with you on the go for free. Just download the Live 365 app to your iPhone, iPod Touch, or BlackBerry and search All Noise Radio. Check out tomorrow's broadcasters today at allnoiseradio.com. Powered by the Connecticut School of Broadcasting.
Welcome back, everybody. The Holy Land Hockey Hour here with the sports rabbi, Yossi G. And always a pleasure to be joined by my main man, Dan, the hockey man, Friedman. Dan, I know it's a little difficult to be doing this over the phone, and I'm sitting here nice, relaxed, comfortable in the studio here, but we got business to take care of. And simply, that is the coaching staff of both Boston as well as Chicago. Why do you think whomever has the edge on the other?
I mean, both. This is like, again, this is another crapshoot. Both coaches have won Stanley Cups, and fairly recently. Both are very well respected. Both are very, very good coaches. I don't think that either team really has an edge in the coaching department. I really don't. It's not that kind of situation where you could say this team clearly has a better coach than the other. Joe Quenneville, I believe Joe Quenneville has won more Stanley Cups. If I'm not mistaken, he had one with Colorado. I can't remember exactly for sure. But, both coaches are very good. And that's part of the reason why these teams are here. They're very well coached. I wouldn't give either team an edge.
Well, I kind of have to agree with you on the not giving either team an edge, because you have Claude Julien on one hand, won the Cup in 2011, and really made every single right move and every single correct decision against the high-flying Pittsburgh Penguins. Quenneville, not really on the other hand, but on the other side of the ice, he won with Chicago in the year before that, in 2010, and guided the Blackhawks back from being down by 2 games, being down 3-1 to Detroit.
And guided a younger team,
And it's a much younger team and a lot of personalities, even though the guys on the team are players who won the Cup with him back in 2010. Still, these are a lot of personalities, as often you find with hockey teams. And what he was able to do, shutting down the Dustin Brown line for Los Angeles in the last round, was unbelievable. For me, I'm a really big Kings fan. I just love the fact that it really is being successful in Southern California, and the fact that Chicago and Joe Quenneville specifically was able to do what he did against the Los Angeles Kings really stood out in significant measures to me. And when I look at both of the coaching staff as well as the head coaches on both teams, this really is a toss-up, as I'm going to have to go with the evenness on this one. But the way that they both employ their power play, and this is the next one, the power play and the intangibles. Just you look at with Boston, their kill was perfect against Pittsburgh. The power play is better than Chicago's at being 15.6% conversion. Chicago only allowed 3 goals in their 50 power play kills the entire postseason, and only allowed 1 goal on the road. That only allowing 3 goals certainly makes up for their middle of the road power play at just over 13%. So when it comes to the power play, if you have to really stretch it in a sense and really fine comb it to see which one has the edge, I have to give it to Boston simply because they have a better conversion percentage. But that said, I think Chicago has been more even keeled throughout the entire postseason versus Boston just coming up hot in the later rounds.
Yeah, I'm not reading into percentages as much, though. I think Chicago, if they turn it around on the power play, I think that they have the better power play. You look at the pieces they have, the guys who they have who can move the puck around and can make plays and can shoot. I think if any of these teams are going to get their act together with the man advantage, I think Chicago has, the talent and has the pieces to really be the better team with the man advantage. I think Boston probably has the edge in penalty kill, in terms of the guys they have on their roster, like Patrice Bergeron and Milan Lucic and Marchand and these guys. So, I think that's how the special teams would shake out in my opinion.
Well, when you look at that, the power play, like you were saying, turning it around, I think that either team, the team that controls the power play usually is the team that wins the series, or in this case, the team that would win the cup. It doesn't always bode or ring true with Boston. When they won the cup, they had an abysmal power play that playoffs, and it was just, how did that happen? That they won the cup, and in spite of how bad and how atrocious they were on the power play. But usually, I will say 98% of the time, you win the power play, you win the man advantage battle, you're bringing home the trophy. And when you talk about intangibles for both of these two teams, Chicago and Boston have both been tested in the playoffs, have both faced adversity. We look at Chicago, they were down to Detroit, as we mentioned a few times, and they've won 7 out of the 8 games since starting their comeback from being down 3-1 and advancing to the finals after the double overtime clincher against Los Angeles, which they were leading in that game and then gave up a game-tying goal with about 8 seconds left to go in the third period. Boston, on the other hand, have won as a team 9 out of 10 since coming back from being down 4-1 and beating Toronto 5-4 in their Game 7, the opening round over there in Boston, where the Game 7 was played. And they avoided the GOAT of giving up a 3-1 lead and letting that slip away. They've also won an overtime game in each round. Therefore, when you look at both these teams, they've faced that adversity. They faced the unknown. They faced the uncertainty of, oh no, we're going to be playing golf in about 8 minutes or so, or tomorrow, if we don't win tomorrow night's game, that's it, we're done. They have faced, both teams have faced, but I think Boston has faced it more and has really seen the offseason in their face, looking at it and saying to themselves, we're down by 3 goals. We have 10 minutes left to play in this third period. Versus Chicago's at least saying we have a whole game and we just take it one game at a time. Boston didn't really have that advantage, if you may. They had the 3-1 lead, and they almost let it slip away. You felt as if Toronto was going to take it, especially being up 4-1. After they scored a fourth goal, it's always like, okay, I'm just going to shut off the TV and leave. But something kept you there. And I think it's that never say die attitude that Boston has. I'm not saying Chicago doesn't, but what we've seen from Boston throughout the entire playoffs, I think that is what gives them the ever so fine advantage on the intangibles. They're both good, both of these teams, but I think because Boston really looked the offseason in the face when they were down by 3 goals in Game 7 to Toronto, that they have the advantage here against Chicago.
Yeah, but like I said, you could say the same thing for the way Chicago turned their series around against Detroit. I mean, they were down 3-1, and each one of those nights, when they made it 3-2, then they made it 3-3, and then they won the series, they had to look the offseason in the face, and I think in some ways that was a much more, impressive feat than the Bruins comeback, because, all the, and again, this is not to say all they had to do was come back and win, but, if they won that game, they were winning the series. Chicago had to do it 3 times, and Chicago had to, even after they won the first game, they were still down 3-2. They still walked into the next game, wondering if that was going to be the last game of their season, and then they did it again. So, to me, I think Chicago has faced, enough adversity that they're in that category too.
Well,
and Boston from that point forward pretty much cruised, after the first round, pretty much cruised through the rest of the playoffs, and faced very little adversity, if none whatsoever. So, while Chicago had its own set of challenges, including the 1-game suspension to Duncan Keith, which they had to overcome. Which look, they didn't win that game, but they certainly, were not terrible in that game, and they certainly came back stronger. So, I look at them and I say that they've overcome plenty of adversity too, and I give them just as much chance to win the series.
I think it's for that reason that Chicago came back and beat Detroit in 7 games and proved me wrong to you. I think it's because of that where I said that Detroit was going to beat Chicago in 6 games, and I was cruising well. I was going very, very fine until Chicago ended up beating them in 7. I think because of that, I have to give the overall advantage to Boston. And I have to say that Boston is going to win this series in 6 games. It's going to be a very close series. And we certainly know home ice does not matter one iota in the NHL. Boston is going to do it, I think, mostly because no matter what situation they're going to be in, they will have that belief that was created against Toronto in that series. They're going to have the belief that no matter how far away they are down, they can always come back.
Well, I'm going to take the Chicago Blackhawks in 7. I think like that. I think they do have that belief as well. And I explained why, because they were down 3-1 in the series. But I think that, at the end of the day, they have more difference makers in that lineup than Boston does. And I think that, when you have players like Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane who can change the game with a single shot or a pass or defensive play, I think that is what ultimately separates you from the competition. And I think that, like I said, Chicago has more players on their team that can do that than Boston does. Boston's a very good defensive team. They have some versatility, plenty of versatility on offense. They have good goaltending. Chicago has that too, though, and Chicago, like I said, has those difference makers, and that's why I give them the edge.
Well, certainly, I know for myself, I hate all things Boston. It's just the nature of the beast, just the way I was always brought up. The New Yorker in me, I cannot root for anything Boston. But in this matchup, as much as I love what Chicago has and what they bring to the table, and as well as their management, I don't know if you've ever spoken to anybody on the Blackhawks staff, the PR people or even some of their coaching staff. Phenomenal guys, phenomenal, absolutely, genuinely nice people. But that said, I still think that in terms of Chicago and what Chicago represents, I think the team brings itself a little bit more across as pretty boy-ish versus Boston has that real grit grinded out in the corner in places where nobody wants to go, get down, block more shots, be in your face all the time. And when you look at the little things, they start adding up for Boston. And that's why I'm looking at the series. It's going to be close. It's going to be very entertaining. And
I'll tell you what, yeah.
No, and that's why it's Boston for me, as much as I hate to admit it, as much as I hate to say it.
I mean, the reason I would disagree with with the idea that they're, really all the pretty boy team is, you look at guys who are on the roster. For Jonathan Toews, does the little things, will crash the net. Guys like Patrick, like Andrew Shaw, like Brandon Saad, Brian Bickle, who's pretty much gotten all of his goals by going to the net, going hard to the net. Nicholas Jalmerson. These are guys who, will grind it out along the boards, who will hit, who will, go to the net, And so I see a little bit of both on Chicago, which is why, again, another reason I give them the edge is I think they're a little more versatile. They can play any style you want. You want to grind down along the boards, they'll do that. With the exception of maybe Patrick Kane, they'll grind down along the boards. These guys. You want to try and trade chances. You want to play a skating up, east-west game. They'll do that too. You want to have a goalie shoot. They'll do that too. Corey Crawford will step up to the task, no matter how good Tuukka Rask is. So they can play any style you want, and I think that, they are the best equipped to win this series, in my opinion. I think it's going to be really close. I think it's going to go to 7. I think Chicago will win.
Okay, maybe I should take back that pretty boy comment, because I don't think anybody in hockey is actually a pretty boy, because between all the teeth that are lost and the noses that are mangled, I don't think anybody's really a pretty boy and going to be on the cover of GQ magazine anytime soon, except for maybe a goaltender or something like that, because they have a mask. But either way, when we come back from this quick commercial break, the Holy Land Hockey Hour will bring to you the 5 keys for this cup. Your keys to the cup coming up right after this quick commercial message. You're listening to the Holy Land Hockey Hour on IsraelSportsRadio.com.
Your computer is blowing up to the sounds of All Noise Radio, powered by the Connecticut School of Broadcasting.
Welcome back, everybody. Holy Land Hockey Hour here with the sports rabbi Yossi G, and as always, Dan the Hockey Man Friedman on the line. As, of course, we know he's a busy guy, working a couple jobs and can't always find himself in the studios. So I'm here. I'm keeping this place nice and warm, and we're lucky at least to be able to get Dan on the phone. Like we mentioned, Dan, before the break, This series comes down, I think, to 5 key points. Firstly, you have the matchup battle between the Boston defense and Zdeno Chara. On the other side, Patrick's Kane Sharp, as well as Jonathan Taves. The key here is, can, on the one hand, Chicago's forwards forecheck and get under the skin of Boston's D-men, and conversely, can Boston's D neutralize the weapons that Chicago has, just like they neutralized the Penguins' weapons in the last round?
Well, I think that the wrong response would be to try and get under Chicago. Like I said, and I've said a bunch of times on the show, I think the wrong response would be to try and get under the Bruins' defense, under their skin. That's what Pittsburgh tried to do, and it clearly didn't work. It's a disastrous result. The key is to keep your composure and force them to make a mistake, maybe, and get them frustrated. Try utilize your passing. Chicago passes very well, and trying to open up some lanes. Go hard to the net, which they have guys who will do that, like Brian Bickle. Brian Bickle, I think, is going to be huge in this series. He's going to be a huge factor because you're going to beat Boston. You got to drive to the net. You've got to get guys in front. And Brian
Bickle's almost
better
matched
than anyone in hockey right now.
He's almost matched his entire regular season output. He had 9 goals in the regular season, 8 goals now in the playoffs. This kid's playing unhinged.
Well, he's gonna get a huge payday in the off season. That's definitely for sure. And I'm not sure he'll ever be this good again. But at least right now, while he's hot, And I'll tell you one thing: even if he doesn't score, he goes hard to net on every shift, and that's what I like about him. And that's the kind of guys. Those are the kinds of guys you need to play. You need to beat Boston. And it's good that they have a guy who's scoring for them that way.
But even though you have guys, let's say, going to the net, but if the puck never gets there, there's no way that your guys who are trying to cherry pick, I guess, are going to have a chance of putting the puck home. Boston gets down and blocks all these shots.
To be fair, though, L.A. has a very good defense as well, and they block a lot of shots. And Chicago found a way to get pucks to net. And I think L.A. defensively is a good, it's a good comparison to Boston. Good goaltending, good defense, very good defense. And I think Chicago really just needs to approach it the same way, and they've shown they can get pucks to the net. They can get it deep. They generate a lot of rebounds, and I think a guy like Brian Bickle could be huge. I think that Chicago does have what it takes to get the puck deep and to get the pucks to the net.
Do you think that the lack of familiarity between both of these teams, the last time they played each other was almost 2 years ago, do you think that the lack of familiarity between both of them will affect the way this series plays itself out?
It could. I don't think that it's such a surprise, though. I think both these teams know, and they're familiar with who they are. They may not have played them, but they, to an extent, they know what to expect. You know what Zdeno Chara is all about. You know the threat that he, you know what he brings to the table. You know what David Krejci's been bringing to the table. That those are not secrets. So I think to an extent, they know a little bit of what to expect. I think there's definitely going to be a feeling out period, at least the beginning of the game. I think just to get a feel for what's going on, for what the way each team plays, just to really understand it and to adapt. I think there's going to be a bit of a both teams are going to have to do that. But I think in terms of at least what to expect, I think they know what's coming.
Well, I look at this specific thing, about familiarity or lack thereof, and I think after the first maybe the first period, I'll give it that much, of the first game of the opening game, I think that is going to be the feeling out period. After it's over, I really don't think that at this time of year that a lack of familiarity, or if teams are very familiar with one another, has that much of an effect, that much of a difference. I think once the puck drops, maybe you give it one period, but that's about as far as I'm going to go, because after that,
at the same time,
you're just
it wouldn't
skating.
be the first time, a team maybe tried to approach a game one way and then realized at the end of that game, sometimes because of a loss that they have to change their approach, change things up, and play better the next game. I don't think you could rule that out.
But I think that also has to do with the scouting, that depending on how teams, like you mentioned, win or lose, the scouting will be able to come back and say, hey, this is how they played after X versus this is how they played after Y, and then as your own team, how then to best approach the following game or that game that you're going to be playing that day. I really don't think that the familiarity aspect is going to end up being an issue. I think they also, for example, Jaromir Jagr on Boston, he played against Chicago this season when he was with Dallas. So at least one person on the opponent's side is familiar a little bit with how the other team plays. So I think that push comes to shove. I mean, these guys are professionals. They've been doing this all their lives, and once the puck drops in the second period of the first game, it's going to be fast-paced playoff hockey for the Cup. Now, the face-off battle. Everybody always talks about the face-offs and what teams have to do and what happens if you don't win face-offs. I look at the face-off battle as being the biggest key in this series. Boston is top dog when it comes to winning face-offs. It's almost as if you expect them to win the face-off every single time they come to the face-off circle, and if they don't, it's like, what? What happened? Well, where did they go wrong? And if Chicago is going to win the face-offs or have any chance, any opportunity to do that, then Patrick Kane's going to have to be on top of his game.
Well, I mean, Patrick Kane's a winger.
Okay, Jonathan Toews, Patrick Kane,
right.
they're all going to have to be there.
I was just going to say, Jonathan Toews is, one of the best face-offs in the league. So, I think Chicago is pretty good on the draws, but this is where, the time said, home ice doesn't really come into play. It doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter as much as people make of it, but this is where home ice advantage can matter. When you have the last change, that every time Patrice Bergeron is in the face-off circle, that Joel Quenneville is going to want to get Jonathan Toews out there to take the draw when he can. And, with home ice, that's an advantage that you can do. So I think that, he's definitely going to try and play it to his advantages. And, I think that's the matchup I'm really looking forward to seeing is Jonathan Toews versus Patrice Bergeron. Who's better in the draw? Who's better defensively? Who's better in the clutch? I think Jonathan Toews is obviously better, but I think they're in a lot of ways they're very similar players. And I'm really looking forward to seeing those two go at it. Yeah,
same here. And also, I look at Boston. They got weapons for the faceoffs up and down their roster. Bergeron, you got Chara. You have a couple of other guys who can really play the faceoff battle and win the faceoff battle, especially in key situations where they don't wilter, where they don't falter. And this is going to be the key. I think that if Chicago is able to somehow not neutralize Boston's face-offs winning percentage, because we know Boston's going to win a big chunk of them. But if they could at least drop that winning percentage from the 60-65% mark down to a respectable, more 50-50 range, that Chicago is going to have a much better opportunity, if they don't at this point, of bringing their game to Chicago, to Boston, to the best way that they can possibly do it. Now, the next thing here is we're talking about Boston. We're talking about their defense. What about Chicago's defense? We know that they love to get up on the rush, to get up into the offensive zone, and usually like to play with with their forwards as well as the one defensive guy in the zone, good and proper. How is Boston going to neutralize Chicago's defensive speed?
By overpowering them and out-muscling on them, honestly, the same way that they've overcome every other team they played. And it's not as much the defense as it is really clearing the crease, clearing the defenseman from the crease, and also making sure you're screening the goalie. Boston, if you look at, I think 95% of the goals they score, there's somebody in front of the net screening the goaltender.
Right.
That's how they get it done, And they have certain guys like Milan Lucic, that will make it difficult for defensemen, to get him out of that crease. That's really how you do it. You out-muscle them in the front, and you make sure you're screening the goaltender. You set the forwards and defensemen up for a shot from the slot and from the point. That's how Boston beats teams. That's how Boston's going to beat Chicago.
I also think that, of course, as it is very important to look out for that all of Chicago's defensive guys can play fast and they can play well, especially on the rush. I think it's going to be important for Boston to really play big and slow in the neutral zone.
They're going to try and slow the game down. Chicago's wanting to go fast-paced, and it's the team that's going to be able to dictate the pace that's obviously going to win.
And the main area is going to be in the neutral zone. And, of course, we are talking about Zdeno Chara. And as we mentioned, that he's been playing about 30 minutes a night every single game throughout the first 3 rounds. Will he be able to handle 2 more weeks of 30 minutes per night?
I don't know that he will. I don't know that he's going to have to double shift, really. I think against Pittsburgh was a very different situation. I mean, Pittsburgh has more weapons on offense than any other team in the league. So, if there was ever going to be a series where he was going to be double shifted, it was probably going to be against Pittsburgh. And, it was working very well. So I don't anticipate that this time around. I mean, Boston has plenty of depth on defense. I think, especially at least in game 1, they're going to feel it out and see how their defensemen respond, how they handle it. And look, if need be, then look, maybe they'll do what they have to do. But I don't think it's going to come to that this time around.
Well, I look at Chara that if it does come to it, I think he's going to be fine. He's in fantastic conditioning. He takes really good care of himself, also between games.
Well, I'll tell you what, though, if he has to double shift, I think Boston's in trouble, though, because your team as a whole is just going to be, the dynamic is just going to be a little off. And against a team like Chicago that can play well, both offensively and defensively, you're going to have trouble.
Oh, I think no matter which way you look at this series, it's going to be fun. It's going to be exciting. And before we wrap things up, just on Dan Bylsma signing an extension with Pittsburgh, and what do you think about the possibility of the Rangers and the Canucks swapping head coaches?
Well, like I said about Bylsma before, I think he's a terrible coach, blessed with a very talented team. Never liked him as a coach. He does not instill discipline. He cannot control his guys. He's shown that 2 years in a row now. His approach to what ended up being a goaltending controversy was just really horrible. I mean, he basically went out and expressed no confidence in Marc-Andre Fleury before the playoffs even started. And even if you don't really have any confidence in him, you can't go out and say that. In a press conference, you've got to say, well, we believe in Fleury, and he's our guy. You got to go through the motion, and say, even if it's empty rhetoric, you got to say it, And to me, it's no surprise, that they didn't get far. I mean, they took a goaltending controversy, made it worse. I mean, I've yet to see a team with a goalie controversy win the Stanley Cup. I don't think it has ever really happened. But Dan Bylsma really did not handle it well, and like I said, I think the discipline and the fact that his guys are, really. When they get rattled, I mean, they just completely lose their minds. And we saw, Jerome McGinley and Brendan Morrow do things that were completely out of character, when they got to Pittsburgh, especially in the playoffs. Brendan Morrow head slammed, I think it was Casey Suzuki for the Islanders 3 times on the ice, ref right in front of him. Jerome McGinley was throwing punches at one point in that series. And in the Boston series, you had Chara, you had Crosby chirping at Chara and trying to start a fight. I mean, you can't have this. And as a coach, like I said, you've got to be able to settle your guys down and say, hey, cut it out. We're going to lose. And like I said, he either didn't do that or he did, and he just lost that room, and his players are not responding to him anymore. So I don't like the fact that they re-signed him. I thought it was very dumb.
How about Tortorella to Vancouver? What do you think about that possibility?
I think if Tortorella is trying to lower the stress level, Vancouver is absolutely the worst place to do it. Unless they get this Luago situation figured out. If they do, then it'll be a little easier on him. And I think that if that team can get their heads straight, I think that Tortorella is quite frankly what they need. And they after all the collapses in the Stanley Cup Finals and then this year the playoffs, they deserve John Tortorella, quite frankly. A guy who will kick him in the butt, and he's the kind of coach you hire for 1 or 2 year relationships to kind of win now. And he's not really for your touchy feely kiss and make up relationships.
Oh, we definitely know that.
And the Canucks are the kind of team that wants to win a Stanley Cup now, and I think that he can help them get there. I think he can help them play a little better defense, get a little more disciplined, because that team has zero discipline.
Oh, should be interesting.
He'll get them in order.
Should be interesting to see what happens out there in Vancouver, their coaching situation, and, of course, what happens in New York with the Rangers and their coaching situation among the other teams. Until next time.
I don't like Alain Vigneault in New York. I don't think he's a very good coach.
I think he's too soft, and I don't think he's going to work well.
I don't like the fact that his teams take a lot of penalties. They just don't seem very disciplined. And, I think that a lot of his lineup changes, a lot of his decision-making is very questionable. I wouldn't do it. I would hire Lindy Ruff if I was the Rangers. I think he's the best choice out there. You want to hire Mark Messier as an assistant coach, fine, but that is not an entry-level position.
No, certainly not. Definitely not on Broadway. You don't do that. You don't do that for your team, especially a team that needs to win now. considering the ages and things as such for their players.
It's not an entry-level position.
No, definitely not. Well, that's all for this show. And until next time, you're going to have to just sit tight, sit back, relax, and enjoy these playoffs because I'm the sports rabbi and he is the hockey man. Until next time, that's all for the Holy Line Hockey Hour. Signing out.
All Noise Radio. The noise you can't ignore.